This time on the Capable Cruising Guide, we're talking about anchors. We're going to go through all of our videos of this type. We're going to split it to three audiences. Voyagers, that's like us, people that cross oceans. I've sailed to Hawaii. I live on this boat more than I live in a house. And most all the time we're living on this boat, we're anchored out. Coastal cruisers, these are people that travel up and down the coast, might play in the intercoastal, might be in Lake Ontario, go out for 3 or 4 days, come back. Your requirements are a little different, and your investment is probably going to be a little different. And then finally, day sailors. Day sailors that probably start out thinking, I'm going to leave my dock, go out, have fun, come back to my dock, or put my boat on a trailer. Everything we do, water makers on down the line, everything we talk about, we're going to try to hit those three. First off, what's an anchor? An anchor is a contraption that we tie to a boat and we throw it overboard, digs into the bottom, keeps the boat from drifting away. There's a lot of different kinds of anchors. The most primitive version of an anchor would be a rock tied to a rope. We have a little more sophisticated anchors now because, well, we've got metal. So we've got things that can actually dig into the earth. If you've got a boat, you need an anchor. An anchor really needs to be thought of as safety equipment. You wouldn't take a car out if it had bad brakes, and you shouldn't take any boat out without an anchor. You can say, I'm just going day sailing, I'm just taking my ski boat out. Well, what if you have an engine failure and you're drifting into some danger? A simple little light anchor saves you until you can call for help on your cell phone or whatever you need to do. You need an anchor. They don't have to weigh a lot, they don't have to cost a lot, but you need something. Even if it's too small for your boat and you're dragging slower. You also need an anchor because even if you have a personal watercraft, you might want to stop at some pretty place and float and have a sandwich. Anchors are great. Anchors are important. This pile of anchors in front of me are all the anchors we carry on Temptress. There's quite a bit of them. They're of various designs and sizes and weights. They all have purposes. I wanted to show you all of our anchors, including our little dinghy's anchor. So I had to borrow an anchor from a friend so we could be tied to the bottom while I do this talk. Some of our anchors are small, easy to manage. Some of our anchors are large and heavy. This one weighs 60 pounds. Some of our anchors are really large and they can be disassembled or folded up. And that's important because this particular anchor it's a major piece of gear. I only use it like if I have a hurricane to deal with. But most of its life it's folded up and in a small cupboard out of the way. I'm going to assemble that one now, and well, this one too. All these anchors have these parts. The parts of the anchors are the shank. That kind of provides leverage for the rest of it so it can dig into the bottom. The stock, that sticks out and keeps the anchor from rolling. And one could argue that this anchor here, the CQR style, doesn't really have a stock, or you could say that this is the stock as well as the Fluke. And the Fluke, which is a big palm, it's like a shovel. It goes in and it's hard to pull out in the wrong direction. And they all have a fluke in common. Finally, the point. The point of the anchor is what lets it dig into the substrate initially. And on many anchors, if you're anchored in rock, it's all there really is that matters. It just becomes like a hook. And this one has a very substantial point, as does the CQR. The Danforths have two, and they tend not to work as points terribly well, so these are very bad in rock. There's other bits to them, and they all have names, but that's kind of the major part. The anchor system needs more than just a good anchor holding onto the bottom. It needs a way to attach it to the yacht. Otherwise, you'd just be taking an expensive piece of gear and throwing it away. The line, the thing that we attach the yacht to the anchor with, we call rode. So this is the anchor rode. Now the anchor rode can be made out of rope. It can be made out of different kinds of rope for different purposes, or it can be made out of chain. It can actually be made out of steel cable. There's other choices, but you're going to find chain and rope are 90% of what anyone would ever find out there. We're going to get into chain in detail, but let's talk about the different kinds of rope I use. And there's various kinds. The very best general rope for anchor, if you're going to use rope, is nylon 3-strand. This is the type that lets you, that stretches the most. So if the yacht comes up really tight, there's some stretch in the system. That keeps the anchor from getting ripped out of the bottom, and it keeps the loads lower on things. So this is 3-strand nylon. This is the best. It's also the cheapest of the nylons, and it's probably the most durable. So why do I have this? This is also nylon. It's actually pretty darn stretchy, but not as stretchy as that. Well, why do I have it? Well, I only use this anchor for kedging off, where the stretch doesn't really help me that much. Kedging off is if I have to pull something off the shore, for example, like if I ran aground. Hasn't happened very often, but it's happened. Or a friend runs aground. But the number one reason I have this particular line is because it was really cheap. I got a great deal on it. Okay, this one bears mention. This is polypropylene. I try to find the best polypropylene I can, but polypropylene is really crappy stuff. Breaks down in the sun. It's not that stretchy. It's not that strong. And why do I choose it? Well, this is my dinghy anchor. And the other end of this is actually attached to the dinghy. Polypropylene floats. And if you anchor your dinghy and you tie up your dinghy, because very often I use this very same line to tie my dinghy to a neighbor or something, the line floats. That way it can't sink down and get caught in a yacht's propeller. It can't get caught in its own propeller. And also, this is quite important, and a lot of people haven't thought of this, I think. If you anchor near a reef with nylon line, the line wants to lay on the bottom and then come up to the dinghy. And it's laying where there's nice coral, and it can damage it. If you anchor near a reef with this gear, the rope wants to float up to the surface and then go to the dinghy, and it keeps the rope out of mischief. So it's much easier to anchor your dinghy. You can safely anchor your dinghy much closer to where you're actually going to dive. And I can't say enough about how dinghies should use polypropylene rode and polypropylene painters. Painters are how you tie up a dinghy. Finally, chain. A lot of kinds of chains out there. The only kind it's worth using on a boat is galvanized steel. The two that you're going to find used on yachts the most are BBB and high test. High test is stronger. BBB is the same strength as what they call proof coil. It's just got the right size length to work in yacht equipment. Galvanized chain is the king of roads. It, on top of being quite strong, it's also really heavy. As much as that big anchor holds the yacht, this chain is responsible for holding the yacht. Just lying on the bottom is a big deal. Also, lying on the bottom, when the yacht pulls on it, it has to lift all that chain before it pulls on the anchor. It takes a lot of energy out of the boat. We're going to go into more detail about anchoring tactics in a different video. But in this one, I just suffice to say, that's rode. This is my snubber. A snubber is basically, because of this stretch of the nylon, an elastic extension to the chain. When you get into situations where the yacht is really moving, really fighting, the waves are throwing her back and forth and such, the chain will just come up because it's steel and just stop. And that'll send a shudder through the boat, and it'll pull the anchor out of the bottom, and it can break gear. So you want to connect nylon to your system. And this is a particularly small piece of nylon for this size boat. That's okay. I don't mind if it chafes through. I'll just replace it because I'm not using more than 10 feet of it. And I'm wanting it to be small so it stretches more. A bigger line just doesn't have the stretch in it. You'd have to hit it harder to make it stretch. So fairly small line. Here's the part that's of some interest. This is called a devil's claw. These are really hard to find and galvanized. In fact, I had to get them non-galvanized and then get them galvanized after the fact. Here's what a devil's claw does. It locks onto a chain very easily and very strongly. You can see how this chain is very, very well supported. You're going to see hooks that go through a chain this way, but they twist the link in a weird way. With a devil's claw, it's 100% as strong. And it doesn't tend to jump out as easy. As long as it's under tension, it doesn't jump out. So the best way, I believe, to hook a snubber, to hook onto chain, is a devil's claw. And the next best way is to simply tie a clove hitch and an extra hitch around the chain. That's a little bit of a problem to untie sometime, but it's a great way to connect. They never slip. Now let's talk about anchors. That's what we're here for. What anchor should you get? You know, they're expensive. They take up a lot of room. They're very heavy. But anchors are, sailors used to put anchor tattoos on them. Anchors mean safety to a sailor. They mean security. If you have just a minimal anchor and you're anchored and there's a storm, you're basically not going to sleep that night. If you've learned to really trust your gear, you know your gear is heavy, you have a good image of how it's into the bottom, you can sleep like a baby in a storm. So anchors mean security, and you're going to want to have that security if you're going to go sailing seriously. How many you need, what styles you need, that really kind of comes down to your style of sailing. So let's start with the Voyager. Yeah, you know, you need an anchor as a Voyager. You're going to need gear that you can use every day, and every day means pretty heavy gear because you don't want to deal with the storm stuff. So your normal day-to-day stuff is going to be pretty stout. You need to have a backup for that entire good system, because if something happens and a road breaks and you lose all your gear and you can't dive down and find it, or if you get hung up in something and there's an emergency and you just have to get out, sometimes you have to cut your road and just leave it. You would just be out of luck if you're at some atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Trying to import one of these will cost so much in a country like the Bahamas or Mexico, and the hassle factor is just not worth it. You want spares. In my case, this is my primary anchor, this CQR style. To back it up would either be the Northill or this big thing. You also need anchors that specialize in all different bottoms. You're going to have anchors, there are anchors out there that they just don't work in rock. There's anchors that work great in rock, but they don't work very well in sand. You need to have probably a bit of a collection if you're a Voyager. Okay, if you're a coastal cruiser, I think you need an adequate anchor, like just about what the West Marine Guide says you should have. You need one of them. You need to kind of know how to use it, but you don't have to do a thesis on it. If things got really bad, you'd go find a marina probably, or you'd go home. You really only need some gear that's going to hold you in a moderate storm, 20 knots of wind. You probably don't need a backup, because if you lost your main gear, you're going to be disappointed, but you'd go home. If you're coastal cruising, you kind of know where you're going to go. You can say, everywhere I go normally, it's a sand bottom. Well, you probably grab yourself a Danforth of some kind. They're wonderful in sand. They're relatively light. They're flat. They're pretty easy to stow. You could say, well, I'm in Lake Ontario and my area is all rock. Well, I'll tell you, Danforths are crap there. You need something that can hook into the bottom. No tide in Lake Ontario, so you don't have to worry about swinging around and going over your anchor. And actually something like this is quite wonderful there. Specialty anchors. As a day sailor, you just need something kind of small, something that'll hold your boat on a pleasant day. You know that if it got really bad, you just go home. You need something that'll hold you, slow you down in an emergency. If it's a weather emergency and there's a lot of wind, heck, you're a sailboat, you get home that way. But if the wind dies and your engine dies and you're drifting someplace you really don't want to drift, an anchor is your savior. So you definitely need one, but smaller. All you really need is a lightweight aluminum or steel, probably Danforth style anchor, some nylon line, you're done. There are so many different anchors out there, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. It's hard to categorize them, but I'm going to take a shot at it, and it's going to be wrong. There'll be some that are on the edges of categories and stuff, but let's split them up this way. I'm going to call this one a traditional anchor. Sometimes it's called a fisherman's anchor. Basically, what I'm trying to model here is the thing that you would see on Popeye's arm, you know? This one's a little different. The one from Popeye's arm, this stock is up here. And the Flukes are much, much, much smaller, and it doesn't fold. But they're really the same anchor in how they perform. Okay, there's a lot of anchors in the world that look like this. The one is the Danforth. So we call this a Danforth. The original was actually a Danforth. These things, I believe, were developed to go on World War II landing craft. And you would drop 2 of those out of the back of your craft, go up on the beach, deliver your tank, and then use winches to pull yourself back out into deep enough water to get away from the guns. And they did a really great job, and they're still being used for that kind of situation. These guys are just bears when they get into sand. Good hard sand in a Danforth, you're done. That's good. Okay, there's a lot of anchors in the world that are shaped like plows. The daddy of them all is the CQR. Looks just like this. The CQR is a plow, and it has this articulation in it. It's the only anchor you're going to really see with this articulation. It really does help. When you're swinging back and forth and how it can bite into the bottom, I like it. This actually isn't a CQR. It's a copy of a CQR. It's a very good copy made by the Danforth company. So it's made by the company who made this one. It looks a little different. It's not a casting. This is a weldment, and then it was heat treated and tempered and all. The very, very big CQRs are made the same way. I like this anchor. I've had it for a very long time. I've kept it around because I just trust it. If I ever lost this anchor, I would go to the next category though. These are these modern anchors. They are very much like this, but like turned upside down. So they cup the bottom instead of plowing the bottom. Examples of this are the Rocna and oh geez, there's so many of them. I like the Spade when it first came out because it folds, it comes apart. I think they're really, really good pieces of gear. Normally in these videos, we talk about how to operate them. That's a big topic. So we're going to talk about that in another video. We're going to have a video on anchoring technique. This is about anchoring gear. Let's talk about maintenance. Nylon line, you don't maintain it so much as protect it. So you can wrap, the only place this is going to really fail quickly is where it rubs over a part of the boat. So what you want to do there at the bow roller or the chalk or whatever you're using, you want to pad it, and you can wrap it in an old towel and duct tape. What works really good is some small fire hose and zip ties. They sell special things that go on with Velcro. They're actually pretty reasonable. That'll protect your line from chafing through. A line is actually a pretty big investment, and if you destroy it in the middle, well, you've ruined the whole thing. So you really want to be careful about all of it. The other part of maintenance of a line, though, really is inspecting it. When it gets bad, replacing it. If it gets bad near an end, you could cut it off and resplice it further up, just making it a bit shorter. Anchor line has to be long, so it's not like you can really do that in the middle. Chain. Maintenance of chain, of galvanized chain, is to try to not knock the galvanize off it, to keep an eye on it, and when it starts rusting, or if it were to stretch, deal with that. If there's anything wrong with the chain, you really have to replace it. If the only thing that's wrong with the chain is it's starting to rust, you can technically get it regalvanized. That's a bit of a hassle, but if you find someone that'll do it for you reasonably priced, that can be very cost effective because chain is quite expensive. The other thing about chain, when you replace it eventually and you need new chain, I have found that American-made chain, AACO and Campbell, really good. The Chinese-made chain, I feel I can watch this stuff rust. It just is crap. It's going to cost half as much, but it's a quarter as good. It's worth spending the money and getting a good chain. The maintenance of anchors, it comes down to two things. Keep an eye on them to see if they're damaged. Especially these lightweight anchors, they can get bent. If it comes up and one of the flukes is bent to the side, toss it, get a new one. They twist, they don't hold very well. They really need to be exactly what they're designed to be to work. So if your anchor's bent, it's toast. Beyond that, maintenance is a function of what it's made out of. So if it's a steel anchor, it's going to be galvanized. That anchor is fine until the galvanized starts to go. When the galvanized starts to go, it's going to start rusting. And unlike chain, anchors are pretty easy to get re-galvanized. I have told you earlier, I really like my anchor here. I like my, my big Plow. I've had this so long, and it's been down for so long, that I've personally re-galvanized this anchor 3 times. Every time I re-galvanize it, it's good for probably about 10 years of active cruising. If you have an aluminum anchor, short of a little bit more chance of bending it, it's really maintenance free. They've got a nice anodized coating on it. It doesn't matter if that gets scratched because the same chemistry happens to aluminum if you just scratch it. It's really self-tending. Stainless steel. I have this one, and this is only available in stainless steel. Remember, this is a aircraft anchor, so it really got special trade-offs in it. Stainless steel shouldn't be used underwater. I know I do, but it shouldn't be. It's prone to something called crevice corrosion. And it's not such a problem with this, the way this is made. This is basically made out of bent sheet metal. But if you have a cast stainless steel anchor, you can start crevice corrosion, and that's where a crack forms and it just goes right through the steel, and all you see is the littlest crack. That's the problem with stainless steel. They're pretty, the mega yachts all use them, and they have a guy polishing them and they look nice. That's what it's for. Mega yachts that sit at a dock and want a pretty anchor. If you want an anchor to hold, you don't want stainless steel. A friend, tell you a little story. A friend had a stainless steel anchor on his boat that was, had the slip beside me back in Seattle. And he had just come in from using it. He'd been out for 2 days. He came back, he pulled into his slip, and he noticed that his anchor was all covered with mud. So he lets his anchor down into the ocean, rinses it off, pulls it back up, and in his, it was this style anchor, but made out of stainless steel. As it rolled over the roller, the anchor broke right here. It was crevice corrosion that had gone through, and it's really surprising. It held the night before, but it just separated, and neither of us had seen any problem with it. It looked perfectly good. Anyway, don't trust stainless steel underwater. My Northill here is going to be our model of a traditional anchor, Popeye's anchor on his arm. People love them or people hate them. The right answer probably is to hate them. A real traditional anchor has very, very small flukes, and the Northill has larger ones, so this holds a lot better. And maybe I'm just crazy. I like this anchor, but I only like it for certain things. The true traditional has an advantage that you can disassemble it. The Yachtsman version of it, you can like completely disassemble it. One this big could go in a bag this big around and this high. So it's nice because when you're not using it, you can store it away. People refer to these as storm anchors, and they buy great massive ones, chiefly because you can fold it up and put it away, and it doesn't take so much room. You can put it down in the bilge so the weight is actually helping the yacht. That's all valid, but to get adequate holding, you'd have to have maybe a 100-pound Fisherman, where this Fortress over here also disassembles. It would fit in the same size bag. It would weigh 30 pounds, and once it's bit the bottom, it's better. All of the traditionals are like your first choice in rock. They're a hook. They're like a big fish hook. They go down, they find something heavy, and they grab onto it. The regular traditionals, the ones without the big flukes, are kind of worthless in sand and really worthless in mud. They bite right in, but then you can just pull them right through the mud. They don't hold because they don't have a big surface. This is an exception. The biggest con of the Fisherman is when the boat dances around it, the anchor rod can very easily get caught in the upward fluke. One will be buried, the other one will be up and exposed. If the rope or chain gets wrapped around it, it's very easy to pull it out of the bottom. And that makes them kind of useless in the Bahamas, where the tide is constantly rocking you back and forth, because you'll end up going around and tripping it. It makes it very good in, say, Lake Ontario, where there's no tide and there's a lot of rock. This would be like a good choice. We're going to call these flat style anchors. I refer to them as Danforth anchors. They do very good in sand. They're really quite amazing for their weight in sand. They're pretty good in mud. This one is extra good in mud because you can actually assemble it a little differently so that this angle is very different. Because in mud, it's very easy to sink into the mud, but it's hard to hold. In sand, if you have too much of an angle here, it won't dig in. I find them lacking in like every other bottom. They're unstable in rock. If they were to catch a rock on one fluke, they just kind of spin around and fall off the rock. If you put them down on a grassy bottom, something with a lot of growth, it just skates along the bottom, and it's really hard to get them to bite in. Some people that use Danforth when they're in that kind of bottom actually drop their anchor, put on a mast, dive down, and physically push it into the sand. And then, then they work. But you don't want to do that. So they have their limitations, but when they work incredibly well. The Danforth's big advantage is they don't rely on weight to do their job. They're very light. This one, though it's very big, is actually, I think it's like 30 pounds. It's really incredibly light because it's made out of aluminum. Strong, but this one is 25 pounds, and I have a very specific use that I use this for. I'll go into in the technique video, but it involves me being able to accurately throw it a distance. And 25 is the upper limit for what I can toss. On some boats, an advantage of the Danforth style is when you lay it down on deck, it's pretty darn flat. If you've got an anchor locker, anchor roller, bigger boat kind of a thing, doesn't really matter. But if you're a small racing boat or a day sailor, you can build like some little wooden supports to hold the outside edges, and this thing can be left on deck to good effect. I mean, lines will get caught on it, but it's not as bad as this thing laying on deck. And nothing is worse than this thing laying on deck. The pros and cons of the Plow type anchors. Well, the pros is they're good all-purpose anchors. They do a lot of things well. Kind of the trade-off of that is they do it well because they're really heavy. Part of them getting themselves down into the bottom is just they weigh a lot. So one of their cons is they're hard to move around. I really dread having to put this back on the roller up there. They're reasonably good in rock. This particular one seems to do quite okay in rock. I find that they're pretty darn good in sand. They're okay in mud. So it's like a good general purpose kind of an anchor for me. The newer versions claim to be better yet in sand and mud. I don't know how they are in rock. I haven't seen a lot of tests of them in rock, but if I lost this, I would get a new Rocna. I think the Rocnas look pretty darn good. It's so hard to talk about cost of anchors because it's like, how long is a piece of string? There's places to cut budget. I mean, everybody's on some kind of a budget. There's 100 places that you could save $1 here or there. But you know, the things you use day to day, if you're voyaging, if you're really going out there, that you want to be able to rely on, your dinghy and the dinghy motor are really up there. Really, it's not crazy to spend like car amounts of money to get a good dinghy because it is your car. Your anchor is security. You're way better off spending more money on your anchor than you are buying an insurance policy. Defender selling anchors, West Marine selling anchors, they've got the prices of everything. Decide what you want shape-wise, decide what you want performance-wise, and then find the best deal. There's some things about anchors that go along with cost. I bought this one used. That one a friend traded me for a smaller anchor because he had no need for such a big one. I don't know if I've ever bought a new anchor in my life. I certainly bought this one used. This is an antique. As long as the anchor isn't too bad with its galvanized, and as long as it's not bent, they basically don't go bad. So buying a new one might be a little silly. If you really want a Rocna, you probably have to buy a new one because they just haven't been out that long and there aren't that many of them. When a new anchor comes out, like the Rocna or the Spade, there's a period where that's all you could buy. There's a patent. Then the patent runs out and other people make a similar anchor. That's capitalism. That's good. That's what brings the prices down. But so many of the knockoffs are just close. They're not the same. The Danforth knockoffs, quite often, the angle of the Flukes to the Shank is just a little different. I've seen tests where 4 degrees different and the thing just won't set. I found some knockoffs that work. These are both knockoffs of Danforths, and I've had really no complaints about them for their job. But you notice these aren't the big anchors that I used to hold the yacht with in a blow. You could say this is a knockoff, but it's a super high quality knockoff of a Danforth. And I've really not heard anybody complain about these. I quite like these. The horizontal claw and the Chinese knockoff of the Bruce are really crap. The Bruce itself is crap in my opinion. I find it sets really well, but it just drags right through the bottom. So I wouldn't have any of those on a boat. In short, anchors are kind of one of those things where you get what you pay for. So I guess my advice is better off buying an old used patent anchor than buying something from China. I'm a guy that likes to make my own stuff. Technically you could weld up your own anchor, but you kind of get what you paid for. There are some things that if you knocked off yourself, you could do a pretty good job at. On the West Coast, most of the fishermen use something that's shaped just like this, but it was welded up in a shop. And they seem to work great. You see them on every longline boat out there. Try to make a Danforth in a small shop and you probably will get something just a little bit wrong, and just a little difference seems to matter on these things. Anchors are a really big topic. Let's keep the discussion going. I'm sure people have a lot of opinions and a lot more to say that I've missed. Let's put it in the comments. Let's all talk about anchors. If you're new to sailing, this is the important thing. Navigation nowadays, anybody can do. Learning how to anchor and choosing the right anchor gear is like the most important thing you're going to do in your whole cruising decision. So let's talk about it. You guys that have done this for a while, help the new guys out. You guys that are new at it, what questions didn't I answer? Let's put them down there.